Ever notice how sometimes politicians like kind of slip into this persona?
Hmm.
This like super relatable, down-to-earth way of talking?
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of what today's deep dive is all about.
Yeah.
We're digging into all the buzz around Kamala Harris and her accent, trying to
Uh-huh.
figure out like what's really going on beneath the surface.
Yeah, it's interesting how something as small as an accent can become this, like, huge political thing.
Right. And we've got this super sharp piece from the New York Times to help us unpack it all. It's called "The Real Reason the Harris Twang is Driving Republicans Crazy."
Hmm.
It's an opinion piece published just the other day, September 18th, by Elizabeth Spears. And she's got a pretty interesting take on all this.
Oh, okay.
So Spears starts off by pointing out what a lot of conservatives have been saying, that Harris is like faking this Southern accent.
Right.
But is she? That's the question.
Yeah.
And if it's not actually a Southern drawl, what are we really hearing? And that's where it gets really interesting because the article, it is like dives into the whole linguistics thing.
Yeah.
And apparently what Harris is doing, it's not a Southern accent at all.
Right, right.
So what is it then?
Well, to really understand it, we got to talk about Black English.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
Black English, that's different from a Southern accent.
Totally different. A lot of people don't realize that, but
Yeah, I had no idea.
yeah, no, it's a super common misunderstanding.
Okay, so like what's the difference?
Well, think of it this way, right? A Southern accent, it's all about geography, like where you're from.
Okay.
But Black English, that's about history and culture, It's got its own rhythm, its own way of putting words together.
It's like
Yeah.
its own dialect.
Exactly. And it's spoken by, millions of Black Americans, no matter where they grew up.
So like someone from Chicago could speak Black English,
Yeah.
but they wouldn't have a Southern accent, right?
Exactly. And that's what's so important here, because the article, it quotes this linguist, John McWhorter,
Right. Yeah.
and he points out that because Kamala Harris is Black, it's totally natural for her to use Black English sometimes. It's part of how she talks.
It's like part of her, what's the word? Like her linguistic
Repertoire.
repertoire. Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, and that's where it becomes less about, like, the accent itself and more about what people, like, think it means,
Oh, totally. Like all those assumptions people make.
Exactly.
Like just because someone speaks a certain way doesn't mean
Right.
it doesn't mean anything really.
And unfortunately, those assumptions, they're usually based on, like, stereotypes and biases,
Ugh, the worst.
not facts, which brings us to the big question, right? If it's not really about the accent, what's all the fuss about with Kamala Harris?
Yeah, what are people really getting at here?
Yeah.
So it's not really about how she sounds, but about what people think it means. Like, what are they trying to, I don't know, imply about her?
Exactly. And the article, it actually uses this example talking about this musician, B.J. Barham. He's got this really thick North Carolina accent.
Okay. I can like hear it in my head already. So what, he's like super conservative or something?
Actually, no, that's the thing. His views are really progressive.
No way.
Mhm.
Really? See, that's what I'm talking about. Like,
Yeah,
people hear that accent and they just,
they jump to conclusions.
exactly. It's like
Oh.
automatic,
Hmm.
which kind of makes you wonder, how often do we do that, in everyday life? Just like size people up based on how they talk.
It's a good question. And it kind of leads to this bigger point the article makes. Like, this whole controversy, it might actually be tied to how some Republicans see themselves
Okay.
as, the party of the working class.
Oh, interesting. Okay, because they're like worried that image is threatened by someone like Harris?
Exactly. Like, she's this example that kind of messes with that narrative they've built,
Right.
Especially since, let's be real, a lot of Republican policies don't actually help working class people all that much.
Yeah, that's true.
So they use these stereotypes, these assumptions about accents and dialects to, like, distract from that.
Wow. It's like this whole, it's like this big performance.
It is kind of.
And we're all just like watching it play out.
Yeah, and the thing is, it works. It really affects how we see candidates, and how we end up voting.
So what can we even do about it?
Well, I think it starts with, like, being more aware. Like, next time you hear a politician using a certain accent or, like, playing up their background,
Right.
don't just take it at face value. Ask yourself, like, is this real? Or is it just part of their, their show?
Their strategy.
Yeah, exactly.
So basically, we got to be smarter listeners. Look past the performance, the accent, all that, and like think critically about what they're really saying.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, we might end up voting for a stereotype instead of, an actual leader. And that's something to think about.